can't remember. It takes a while to fly there, but I can't remember what their time zone is.
I want to say it's
back
3 hours off of Pacific.
5 hours.
I thought it was 5 hours.
They don't do DST, so it depends.
It's 4 a.m.
Yeah, so that's why we don't get a lot of folks from any of the islands, those islands.
And also depends
Alex?
if the surfing's good. If the surfing's good, they're never here.
Out there at 4 a.m. It wouldn't surprise me. Dedicated servers are like wonderfully crazy. Okay, I think Alex is back, and I think we're live on YouTube.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're on YouTube and you see a little button down below, you can join Zoom or you can sign up for Zoom, and then you'll get emails from us about once a day telling you what's happening. If you're here and you're looking at all these fine people in the panel and you're wondering how do they become panelists, and I'm not a panelist, and you just have to be here early. You have to have good internet, good video, good audio, and be here by 6:40 in the morning. When we start doing mic checks, sometime between 6:40 and 6:43, well, that's it. That's the panel for the day. So get here a little earlier. Also, if you are, someone's got an open mic there. If we do start informally at 5. We start talking. There's a meeting. You'll get it in the emails that are there, and then we start the pre-show. That's the like first breakfast, and then the second breakfast is the pre-show, and the pre-show is at 6. I can't promise anything what we're going to talk about, but sometimes it's pretty good. It's a lot of fun anyway, and so you can come in early and hang out with us. We normally do a post show as well. I forgot yesterday. I can't tell you. I'd love to give you a good reason for it, but a good technical reason. But I just I suddenly saw someone had joined like at 9:30, and I was like, oh no. And so but we will have a post show today. Anyway, sorry about that. As in South Park, moo moo moo. Anyway, so if anyone gets that. Anyway, so anyway, so the first hour, of course, is all based on your questions. Everything's based on your questions, and we run the whole show on your questions. It's probably the most audience-driven show ever. we only run on your shows, on your questions, and so we really depend on you to ask questions. Now, if you're going to ask questions about mixers today, mixers is what we're talking about in the second hour. Make sure to say mixers : that way we know that you want to keep that for the second hour. But otherwise, we've got some incredible audio knowledge here in this group, so it's a really good time to kind of really figure out all the bits and pieces you need to know about mixers today. So that second hour is always going to be a more, not always, but generally a vertical that we're talking about. Tomorrow we're going to have a special guest or some special guests talking about a new product that's coming out. And then on Thursday, we're talking about engaging audiences. And I think we might get Daria Musk back. She might come back and join us to talk about that. And then Friday, we're going to talk about Atem OSC, which is kind of a way to kind of ramp up your Atem offerings, automate it, and connect it with a lot of other devices. And then Saturday, of course, we have our focus on education, which we have a lot of educators come in and talk about media and online learning and that type of thing. Sunday, we just talk for 2 hours. So that's kind of how this all runs. Again, we're running a little low on questions, so we're really depending on everyone to ask questions and vote them up so we know which ones to talk about more. Anyway, so Bill, I think we've got a couple.
We do, and the first one comes from Angela Iserman on the panel from Golden's Bridge, New York, with Angela with the pretty lights behind her. I always like that look. And she asked, what is the most cost-effective but stable way to add lower thirds to a live stream? vMix, OBS, and note they're a Mac-only house.
Stable is the key question. Jason and then Mickey.
Here to Record Graphics is a fantastic, like completely free app that his name is escaping me, but John Barker does, and I believe it's just at Here to Record. It's a free app, and it will allow you to output simultaneous fill and key, or just do it with a green screen reduction. It's not going to help your final step though if you don't have a hardware mixer, but yeah, I think it's a fantastic place to start, I guess.
We do have an Atem Mini, so.
Yep, then it'll work.
And you can do a couple things with the Atem Mini. It depends on whether you want animated lower thirds or just still lower thirds. So remember that. Sorry, what were you going to say, Angela?
I was just saying animated under my breath on mute.
Oh yeah, I actually don't use animated lower thirds very often, unless I have to. Here's what I find is that they add a lot of complexity to your pipeline. I don't know if it's kind of like, here we can show them to you. Like I'll maybe do something simple, but if you watch most broadcasts, not a lot of animated thirds, and if they are, they're pretty minor. There's a lot of them that come up, and there's tickers, and there's all kinds of stuff like that, and sometimes they do little scale things and so on. But I find it in online stuff. I find it better just to say, hey, this is fade in, fade out. That's all I usually do if left to my own devices, because I like it to be subtle, for what I'm doing. But if you want animated lower thirds, you will need a key fill. You can remember that you can do Luma key, which means that you can put out. We used to do all of our lower thirds out of Keynote, so we would do Keynote and we would animate them and do whatever we want to do with them, and we would just do it over black. But we'd make sure that there was no black in the image that we were animated in that was darker than 15%. And so as long as no black that's that darker than that, and then use the Luma key, and we would key it even with little soft edges and rounded edges and so on and so forth. You can pull off a key with Keynote, so you can do that. There's a lot of other, there's Softron makes a dedicated system. ProPresenter also does a great job of key fill out, and QLab, which we've talked about from a Mac side, will do key fill out, and then they'll take up 2 of your inputs on your Atem Mini to do that. Go ahead, but you can do 1. If you do Luma key, you only take off 1 because it's the same. You're just keying your own footage. Jeffrey, and then Bill.
Yeah, the one thing that I just did for a client because they wanted this was the something similar like that. You take up channel 4, you plug in the HDMI into that, and then I created videos for them, and I put the lower third on the top of the video. Then I went in and I did the picture in picture, and I cropped it so it would then show up on the bottom third. You would then start the picture in picture. That would bring the lower third up. Whatever animation was with that, and then when it was done, you just turned off the picture in picture. It was a little archaic, but it worked.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, decades ago, somebody taught me that your brain automatically goes to motion wherever you're looking, because it's throwback to that reptile brain of there could be something moving out there and that could be a threat to me. So I have to track it. So I always kind of suppress my urge to animate anything that's going to be on a screen where I want people to concentrate on the topic, because even though it's there, it takes a while to get yourself off of, oh, that thing is moving. I'm going to keep looking toward it and fix on where I want them to look. And actually, for me, that's, as an editor, that's the goal, is to control where the audience is looking most of the time by using things like motion and brightness to direct their eye.
And another thing to think about with lower thirds is just where you put them. We call them lower thirds, but nowadays we have all kinds of tickers going across the bottom. We have IDs. If you're doing it for social media, you've got those stupid little bubbles, all that thing that are going across the bottom. So just figure out, you might, lower thirds now often are mid thirds or mid eighths, little things that pop over on the side to kind of, so you want to look at your live stream, do a test live stream, see where your, live button is and where other logos or burn-ins might be. A lot of times when I'm designing stuff, we'll build a template where we have blackout areas where we know that there's things going on in those screens that we care about or that we have to avoid more likely. Not so much we care about, but we can't go over. One of the worst things in live streams, in my opinion, is graphics overlaying over top of each other, or over top of each other, like where you see a lower third that came over a ticker or a bug that came over, it screams, I didn't plan this out. Anyway, if you ever see me do this, I don't know if I talked about this. This is the dinosaur from Meet the Robinsons. My head's a really big head and small arms. I don't think this was very well thought out. If you see us on a set going, that's what that means. I don't think this was very well thought out. Mickey.
Yeah, I would also consider looking at the Memo Live. I mean, Oliver's been in the panel of quite a lot, and he did a lot of sessions that taught how to use Memo Live. Because you mentioned stable OBS on Mac, not so stable generally. But yeah, take a look at Memo Live. If the hardware option with using your Atem doesn't work out.
And I believe that Memo Live will also do a key fill out, so you could use it as your lower third generator if you wanted to as well. Next question.
And we're moving to Paul Wallace of Austin, Texas. Alex used the term convenience panel yesterday. What is this and how is it used? What are some links to websites and so forth supplying these?
Go ahead, Jason.
Wouldn't that be the same as a comfort monitor?
No, it's not. No. So
I'm sorry, bad joke. Yeah, go ahead.
So convenience, a comfort panel. So a convenience panel, convenience monitor. What Jason was referring to is in the U.S. the screens that we put to hold your notes and your next slide and everything else down in front of a stage we call them convenience monitors. So you can see it in the UK and Europe they call them comfort monitors, which we think is very cute. Anyway, so it seems much nicer. Anyway,
confidence monitor.
We call them confidence monitors. Yeah, I'm sorry, not convenience monitors. See, I'm getting this all. It's early in the morning still for me. I got in here a little late. So confidence monitors. We have in the U.S. it's confidence monitors and it's comfort monitors. Convenience panels are basically pass-throughs of all your signals from your equipment in the back of a rack. And what they do, it's convenient because you don't have to put your arms in there. What happens is you get a router, a 40 by 40 router, and you got a whole bunch of little cables all tied in there. Something goes wrong, or you have to plug something in. You're getting in there, and you have to use what we call a trumpeter, which is like this little. It extends out and it kind of grabs onto it. So it's got there's Jason has a convenience panel. So what that does is it takes all those signals and it puts them out into the back of your rack, and we use them religiously for our stuff. And there's a couple of reasons for it. One is it typically will spread those out so that a real hand can actually put your SDI signals or HDMI or Ethernet or USB. It doesn't have to just be SDI. You can have all kinds of things in there. You can build these. We a lot of times buy our convenience panels empty. So they're just empty slugs going across. So it'll be like 16 slugs. And then you buy the converters and you put them in there. And I got 3 HDMIs and 2 SDIs and whatever. And then you can label them really nicely. The main thing is it keeps crew, especially the freelance crew, away from your hardware. so they don't start using what we call rough hands. They get in there and they're in a rush and they're not thinking about it. And they start it's not one time, it's every time over long periods of time that they slowly damage your equipment. And there's a trumpeter. That's Jason showing you a trumpeter. And that's what you have to use when you don't have a convenience panel to get into a 40 by 40 router or the back of your Constellation or anything else like that. You need to get an SDI popped out. You got to use that to kind of grab onto them. So what you do is the idea is you do all that work in the warehouse or in your studio. Then when you roll a rack out, or even if you're in the studio and you have to, usually you take the signals that you might have to use more often or that you want to have externally available and you plug those all in and it's very convenient and it's not very expensive. And when someone catches one of your SDI cables on their forklift and rips that connection out, it costs you $16. It doesn't turn your router, your 40 by 40 router into a 40 by 39, which we've had done. Go ahead, Bill.
Jason, I didn't pin you fast enough. Can you hold that convenience panel up for us again, please? I didn't pin you fast enough.
I'll put a link in Discord.
I mean, you can get MarkerTech it sells a lot of different kinds of convenience panels. I think that's where we probably get most of ours. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and that tool, the trumpeter, it works with a BNC connector, which are highly used across the industry. I asked somebody once what it came from, and no one seems to know. I've heard British naval connector, I've heard British nut connector. I've heard people say, no, it has nothing to do with British, but it's a BNC, and they're one of the most ubiquitous in video connectors you will ever find.
Go ahead, John. Oh, you're still.
Yeah, no. This is what I use. It's just it's not a rack, but this goes into my Atem and then all the connections happen here.
Yep. Yeah. So, and that's a kind of a breakout panel or breakout group. And so, but yeah, for us, mostly the convenience panels are stuff, and the back of our rack oftentimes will be filled with convenience panels to keep all of that stuff. Again, a lot of it is to protect our gear from everything else. And it makes it more convenient. Dave.
Middle Atlantic makes, instead of a fixed rack that has holes punched in it, they make it looks like 2 tracks, and then they're little square plates that you can order with Cat 5 hole punch throughs or BNC punch throughs or XLRs. So you can mix and match if you just want one rack panel that has a little bit of everything.
Well, we buy those, but the ones that we buy don't have the slider. They just have larger holes in them with 2 little screws or 4 little screws on either, around them, so that you kind of do the same thing. But I'm interested in the track one. I haven't used
Yeah,
that one,
Middle
but
Atlantic
that's how we mix
products.
and match.
They look
Yeah,
like the wall plates for your electrical outlets, sort of.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they're anyway, those are convenience panels. Only here can we talk for 5 minutes about convenience panels. All right. Next question. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
Moving along.
Scott. Sorry, Scott.
I was just going to say to Bill, balanced neutral connector. That's from the guy who invented them.
Someone, Eric Hall in the thing said Bayonet Neil Councilman. So
that's
it's one of those terms.
What we'll say, Scott, repeat it from the guy who
balanced neutral connector. It's from
There
the
you
guy
go.
who invented him. He's on the SEMTI connector committee.
Awesome. All right, I'm
Next
retraining
question.
myself now.
Well done.
Perfect. Okay, moving along to the next question, and it is from Raphael Jacquois of Grenoble. Blackmagic. In the page for the Atem Constellation, it states that one can control the sound mixer with a Fairlight console, but there appears to be no documentation on how anywhere. Anyone have any more information on this? And he's noting that the screenshot is the Atem forum it is the screenshot in the Atem forum in Discord.
I don't think any of us have a Fairlight mixer to test it with. I think that's the challenge. We don't have any of the Fairlights there. I mean, that mixer integrates with lots of other MIDI based mix, surfaces, and so you can. I don't know what I don't know exactly what the connection is, but it's designed to work with a lot of different things, and I think Fairlight is one of them. Does anyone have any? I just think we don't have experience because we haven't gone down the Fairlight path yet. Okay. Next question. Sorry.
It's okay. We've done our best. Moving on to.
I will say that I have seen. I have a new interest in Fairlight only because I've had the opportunity to work in a large modular mixer that's 30 feet long. And each section is just a series of faders when we talk about mixers. And I believe it's a Euphonics based mixing bay, but anyway, it's big. And what was interesting is just that those are all considered just convenience, like that you can do all of it in the software, but it's nice to have those sliders so that you can kind of organically find things. And it just becomes, all that's the sliders. And we'll talk about that with mixers, but a lot of those sliders they don't add more features. They just make it easier to get to those features, quickly and easily and organically. So next question.
Hey, we're back to TJ Asher of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he wants to talk about scopes for a second. How do I tell my proper exposure with scopes? I was looking at my setup in Scopebox and was trying to check my exposure level. The RGB parade showed what looked like clipping in the red channel, but overall the waveform did not have anything touching 100.
Well, that's exactly why you need the RGB parade, because a lot of times until you tune your eye towards it, you won't see the clipping. You'll see that Jason is a little. I can just look at this and say Jason's probably a little warm. In that area.
Little warm. I haven't messed with it
because his red channel is a little bit higher than his green and blue channel. What can happen though is that the reason the RGB parade is so. Now, what this is, by the way, what you're looking at is red, green, blue. And across the image, sampling it, this is what you'll see. This is like Jason's. The middle part is Jason's head. The other parts at the back, his background is there. There's his hand, and so it's these values. And there you can kind of, if you see both of them there, if you move your blacks up a little bit, Jason, just so that people can see that. So you'll see, go be extreme. Knock those. See, you're seeing the blacks. See, now the blacks are way high, and then as he lowers them down, they'll get blacker again. And if he pushes them way down, they'll start to, now it's starting to posterize because they're clipping on the blacks. You can see that there. So as you look at this waveform, what you can see is that that when it's clipping in red, it's clipping. Like your red is clipping. Where you'll see that is a loss of detail in skin tone or some kind of red, whatever you're wearing that might be red. You can't quite make it out. It's not like it's a hard white clip, but it's starting to get smooth. Usually what happens is you see it kind of smooth out, and that's because it's that area is clipping. So RGB parades are really useful in that area because they'll also give you a general sense of balance between the colors, especially if you have a gray background or something. if you don't, if that gray is in different heights on it, then you're probably off, in that area. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Eric.
Just looking at the monitor that Jason's displaying with the waveform, all of those are like, that's a monochrome display. Do people find it easier to read it if it's colored red, green, and blue for each channel on the display, like what the Atom Shogun does, compared to the monochrome? I see Jason's ready to answer me and tell me I'm wrong.
Go ahead, Jason.
No. I honestly, I don't even pay attention to the color because it's always been red, green, blue. So I guess initially, yeah, it was probably easier, but at this point, who cares? I'm just glad it doesn't burn my monitors in.
I think it's easier for people to it's easier for people to, when they get started, to look at that and see red, green, and blue and understand it. I actually think it's harder to read because I just want it to all be, I'm not looking at the color of it. I'm looking at the I'm specifically looking at the values, and so I don't actually like to have the different colors. It's also a more expensive execution of that. You can have a cheaper monitor do the same thing. So, but I find it easier to read them when they're all just black and white. Go ahead, Eric.
So first of all, how did you separate them into RGB in that kind of main graph? And also, how did you affect the changes that you just demonstrated?
So that's,
are you asking me?
Jason. Yeah, that's an RGB parade. They just call it RGB
Jason.
Parade. Yep, go ahead, Jason.
Well, my RGB parade looks different.
Okay.
It shouldn't. It really shouldn't. I guess there are some variations. Sometimes they're on top of each other, but I'm using a hardware panel to shade a camera. And the scope itself is hardware. So it's a, what's it called?
It's a Blackmagic Smart Scope.
Yeah, Smart Scope Duo 4K.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the power, like you see what Jason's doing. That's why having like an Atem Mini, even for your camera, is really useful, because you can go in there and shade, shade the camera, and be able to, then when you have those scopes, you can very quickly get to where you need to go. And especially if you're matching cameras, it's really useful. Dave?
Yeah, if you're training yourself on RGB Parade and you have that scope that's all white, you can just take 3 pieces of colored gaff tape and put it under each one on the bottom of the scope, just so you don't have to remember R, G, and B in that order.
And the other thing that I would recommend is just keep scopes open all the time. Have a screen with scopes, even if you're not going to use them immediately. Number one, for clients, it's nice eye candy. But like you have a bunch of scope. I did it when I first did it. I did it literally so because we're streaming. When we stream, I've got an encoder. Like if I'm not doing anything else, I've got an encoder, and I've got maybe a recording device. I don't look very impressive. And how do I charge my clients if I don't look like I'm doing something? If I'm just sitting here with the machine and you turn the machine on, eventually clients go, we don't need that person. We just need that machine. So I had to, look like I was doing something. So I put up a bunch of monitors and I put up a bunch of scopes, and, presentation is a big part of business. Like you think that you can just go in and do your thing, but presentation is important. So I had all this kind of array of data and everything else. Now what happened is once I had that data up, I started paying attention to it, and then I started learning from it, and then I couldn't do a show without it, so like you get used to it, like, and then after that you stop paying attention to the video. You're just looking at the screens. I can tell you most of what I need to know. Like where they really become useful, we talked about in the past, is like audio waveforms. We'll be streaming 20 rooms, and I can look across and tell you that this room is too low, and this room has a ground hum, and this room has I don't need to listen to it. I can just look at the scope and tell you what that means. And so the scopes are super important to what you do. And but the best thing to do is keep one open all the time, so that your brain is constantly connecting the video that you look at, the image, with the scope, and you'll connect things that look good with a good scope and things that look bad with a bad scope, and you'll slowly start to get to a point where it makes sense. Go ahead, Bill, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, scopes move you from I think I know what I'm seeing to I know that I know what I'm seeing. And that's an important thing if you want to be consistent. All right, we're moving on to the next question, which means that Eric Hall, and this actually is following right along with the Scopebox discussion. He's looking at Scopebox on Big Sur, and it is constantly crashing. Any ideas as to why it's being unstable for him?
Go ahead, Jason.
There's exactly one reason. It hasn't been updated for Big Sur. Like, that's it. The 64-bit plugin, whatever component they're using to tap it, it's not up to date yet.
There you go. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that with Big Sur for a little while. I'm not updating all my computers to Big Sur, just a handful of them to test things and see them break. But there's definitely, I have about a third of my apps are having some issues on the Big Sur stuff. So it works where it works really, and the M1 works really well. But because a lot of us use production apps, they tend to have a more complex code base, and they didn't just write them to the OS, so they're a little slower. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. That, this was a big OS change for particularly Big Sur is kind of for the new world of the M-class chips. So it's going to take a while for that to settle out, I think. But
the rumors, by the way, as an aside, as your little M1 update, I don't know if you've seen the rumors for next year, but they're talking about 24 and 32 lanes on both the graphics and the that's the rumor.
Oh yeah,
CPU
I'll
and
buy
GPU
that too.
With 128 gigs of RAM, like 64 gigs of RAM. So I don't think we're gonna be limited to 16 for very long. Go ahead, Eric.
TJ just put a post in saying apparently they claim to support Big Sur.
Yep.
So
I sent a report. Mike over at Divergent Media is pretty responsive, so you should just let him know. Next question.
Okay, moving on. This one comes from Jonas Totel of Reutlingen. Alex, what's your current setup? It looks really good today.
Why, thank you. No, I have it's hard. I keep on trying to get the mixer. I've just been really busy building other kits. But I have two Forza 60s. They're NAND lights. They're like these little ones, and they're pointed at like a 3-foot by 36-inch by 24-inch reflector or diffuser, and so it just hits that and bounces back, so it's nice and soft. So that's the lighting. I'm going through a Scorpio because I have one here, so it's just I know this is going to sound horrible, but my iMac sits on the Scorpio better than the Mix Pre. So anyway, so it's a good. I take it out too. The hard part is I use the Scorpio a lot of other places. It's just in the morning I use it here, and then and it's way overkill for what we're doing here. Anyway, and then I'm testing a bunch of settings for a mini URSAs, and I'm testing LUT setups. Not right now. I mean, nothing complicated right now, but HDR LUTs and so on and so forth. So I'm using them with a mini URSA 4.6. So that's what I have. That's what I'm looking through. I don't think it would look that much different than the 6K. In fact, 6K I think looks a little nicer than the mini URSAs at this point. I think the chip's better. At least the version I have, which is an older version. So I'm playing a lot with. We'll talk about it when I get a little further down the path. But I'm playing a lot with creative LUT styles and also building LUTs for HDR. So taking that log information and pumping something out the back of the camera that can stream well in HDR. So it's got to go through some conversions, and so it's nice to have a camera that can do that. So that's why I have it here. It's way overkill for what we're doing here. Mickey?
Yeah, just a little bit on a tangent. Like when you're doing remote recordings with cinema cameras, do you guys monitor log footage, or do you apply a LUT on the output of the camera?
So I apply a LUT on the way out, mostly because we have clients that are watching and they won't understand what they're looking at. So they're not. So if I have a non-technical client, I'm going to put a LUT on it because I don't need it, but I know that they need it. And it also, if it looks like it's peaking or blowing up or whatever in the camera, in the LUT, I should be careful and pull it back a little bit, from that, because I don't have full control over there. One of the things we're trying to kind of figure out there is it's a bummer that there's a camera control that controls the 6K over Bluetooth, and Jesse Mills, who's not here right now, but he's the one that suggested it, and we started playing with it. It's pretty great. You can control most of the things, but what you can't do, you can't turn false color on and off, which is a really big issue for us, so that we know where we're at in exposure remotely. Now, the other thing we do is over Zoom, we set show all the status into Zoom. So I see everything in the camera. I can see when it's rolling, when it's not rolling. I can see all the settings. I can, so it just gives me confidence that I'm doing it. I'm not going to record that part of it because I'm recording on the camera. And then so that's for the ones where we're recording, like with cinema cameras, we're generally recording on the far end. not through Zoom. So that's kind of how we approach that. Next question.
Moving on, Ken Jones is up next from Seattle, trying not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. What's an acceptable residual hum and noise level for a live stream? How good is good enough?
Never. Anyway, Stuart.
I'm going to argue against never, actually.
Oh, man, I hate it.
Okay, I do motorsport, so we've got a lot of background noise, engines running and whatever. So some hum can escape through, and you'll never hear it over the noise of the engines. If you're doing something like Jeffrey has mentioned before about doing musicians recording, absolute zero. You want less hum than negative. But it depends on what you're broadcasting and how important it is for that broadcast to happen. If it's something world-changing, you could get away with a lot of hum. But if it's just something normal for broadcast, you want none. But getting away with it is different to actually tolerating it.
Mickey and then Jason.
Right. For me, hum is a technical error, so I won't accept any hum. Noise, like when Stuart's talking about like the noise of the engines and all that, to me that's not noise. That's effects. So and I want to keep effects, but noise meaning signals that you don't want as much as possible. Like how good is good enough? As much as I could get rid of.
Yep. Yeah. I go, Jason.
Yeah, see, hum is just fine as long as you can tune it to be approximately the frequency of the engine of the race that you're shooting, and then you're all good. No, I mean, my answer immediately is with Mickey. Like, no way. There's no good thing for hum. It's easy to fix if you've got it through your USB because you've got bad grounds. There are isolators that you can get that don't cost much. Resistance coils, like, get rid of it or notch it out if you have to.
Good, Brian.
So just for clarity, hum is typically a 60 cycle hum or a 50 cycle hum. It's generally caused by a ground issue. It's generally caused by an electrical issue with your grounds not being isolated correctly. So it's that sort of kind of sound noise.
And again,
sort of
to get back to scopes, if you have a hum, you'll see a line, that's going straight across. So you can just, if you see a constant line and then you see all the rest of your things going on, you know that you're.
Yeah, and then noise is kind of the blanket term for everything else, and it's just like anything else that you don't want in the signal. And of course, I echo the sentiments already expressed. It's like what you want is zero, but sometimes, and the best example I can think of as a guitar player is like Fender Stratocasters, any sort of single coil guitar. They make a lot of noise when you turn them on because they pick up everything. It just goes with, but they sound so cool. And as soon as you start playing them, you can't hear the noise anymore. So we all put up with the noise because we just basically, because it sounds so cool. So there's always that give and take of, oh, I've got a motor car going by at 100 miles an hour. I can't hear the little tiny bit of, okay, that's a different situation.
Courtney?
Yeah, Brian, yeah, you can't hear the hum because you instantly go temporarily deaf when they turn the amplifier up to 500 dB. I think the only acceptable situation where hum is okay is if you're doing a live shot from an electrical substation. Then okay.
If you're on top of an FM transmitter, you're good.
And there's, outside of ground loops, which have their own issues, the main thing that I do to get rid of hum specifically is, number one is I don't allow unbalanced connections anywhere in my signal. So it's just like I'm religious about not having those, like if I see someone with a little pod DI or whatever, I usually want to get rid of it pretty quickly. And not even short runs or long runs. I just don't want unbalanced connections. And I try to find ways to eliminate those. The other thing I do is I try to minimize analog runs. So we even when we started supporting some political things that we were working on, someone came over and asked me like, how's your audio so good? And I'm like, Dante, so instead of running 100 feet from a CL5 where it was beautiful, all the way over to what's called a mult box, which is a box we just ran Dante over and then popped them out into that thing, so that long run is all data. And when it gets over there, it just pops out, and there's a real short analog balanced run into a pod DI, or not in a pod DI, into the mult box. And then everyone gets nice and clean audio. And so, but like, if you wonder why all your political rallies all have that hum, it's because they're running this long cable through it. And then they've all kinds of ground issues because you've got a whole bunch of camera operators, and they didn't set up the the best way to talk about the press at a political event is kind of a scrum. Like it's just, these guys come in and they just jockey for position. And we when we do it, we actually put a platform for our camera operator. We spread it out from everybody else. So we give everybody like an inch around us. And there's a nice, comfortable space for our operator that's not the same as our camera platform. And then we let them fight it out for the rest of it. We're like, yeah, you can do whatever you want over there. We don't even give them we give them a shared riser. Eric, and then Courtney.
Balanced audio versus chassis ground. I think that's what I'm hearing here, and I'm still not understanding the difference. Are we talking about a common chassis ground to eliminate hum, or are we talking, what's the balanced audio? And I thought it's just a grounded shield. Is it...
Well, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and answering that somewhat, and one thing to watch out for is most Electret condenser microphones have unbalanced cable up into the connector, at least, or a transformer. So you have a short piece of unbalanced shielded cable, and ground is particularly thorny. There's signal ground, and then there's chassis ground, and those two things are frequently separated and frequently combined. And a lot of times you can eliminate hum by grounding on one end and not grounding the other end. And the problem you come into, what can induce hum is, as Brian was saying earlier, is voltage differentials. There sometimes is a voltage that is superimposed on the ground connection. And if you plug into one outlet somewhere and another outlet somewhere else, the differential between those two grounds is going to generate your hum. And so if you lift the ground on one end and keep the ground on the other end, then you'll still have a path to ground for some signals, but you won't have the signal differential between the two grounds, which can induce hum into any unbalanced lines or any of your analog, mixing equipment.
Bill?
It's a black
So
art.
balanced lines are an active noise canceling system, and it has to have two pieces of equipment on the two ends that understand this little system, which is it sends neutral, and then it sends the signal positive in phase relative to that signal, and it sends a negative in phase positive to that signal. At the other balanced end, it understands those things are coming on, and it inverts the two legs. And what that does is that any noise that got into the whole cable at the same time, RF, hums like we're talking about from ground lifts, it sees them on both sides, and when it inverts one leg, it actively cancels that signal.
And to be clear, the math is that it inverts it and then sums them. When it sums them together, it basically pulls them together, and the waveform is the same. The only thing different is all the noise, and they're opposite of each other exactly. So they negate each other. So it's the process. It's a really simple math. It's invert the signal and then sum it.
Sum it back up.
And it gets rid of it gets rid of that noise. Next question.
Okay, moving along to Ivan of Chicago. Is there a setting in Zoom Rooms to remove overlays from the display to have a clean full screen output? We've talked about this.
The cleanest output that we've gotten is from Zoom Rooms using a second room that is we get everything's clean for us except for that little connection. There's a little connection graphic in the lower corner, and it's completely useless. It's just that we don't use it at all. We don't care that it's there. We just care that it's still left there. So, but outside of that, for us in Zoom Rooms, if you have other selected for that monitor, you shouldn't see any other screens. One thing to be careful of with Zoom Rooms is that if you're only using a one screen, you may still have that chat turned on. We would love to be able to turn chat off, so that we would love to have a setting in Zoom Rooms that basically says show no graphic. like just a button that says, no graphics, like, and it never pops up. There's nothing that ever pops up. There's no name, there's no whatever. There's just like, it just overrides all of the settings. It just says, I don't want to see anything coming out of this ever. And I think that would be kind of the holy grail for people doing events with Zoom, is to just be able to push a button and know that nothing's going to come. No little chats are going to pop up at the bottom, and no alerts and nothing. Anyway, but I think that if you have multiple screens and you have one of the screens set to other in a Zoom room, you should only see that connection down in the lower corner, which takes if you scale up your image 105%, it gets rid of it. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Another thing you can do if you're screen scraping is if you've got a 1080p monitor and you're only doing 720 on the Zoom, you don't do the full screen, or you do the full screen on that, but then you size the window and then scrape the area, because what that does is it not only takes the name but also that little useless icon off to the side and not on the active video, and then you're just scraping what you got there.
And to be clear, we're always scraping the screen from Zoom because we don't have SDI out. Can't see a deck link on the way out. It can see a deck link on the way in, just can't see it on the way out. It's crazy. It knows it's there, just doesn't want to use it. All right, next question.
Eric Hull is back from Mount Vernon, Washington, with another Big Sur. After Big Sur, Spotlight takes forever to index and then forever to anticipate search. Is there a fix for that?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, you need to blow away. First, you should be on an SSD if you're running Big Sur. But second, there's an easy terminal command that will just blow away, and you can just Google it to blow away your index, reboot, and then just tell it to index again, and you should be good.
So it's just the old index that's messing it up.
Yeah, it's the legacy of the index. Either that or you've got a time machine mismatch. That's the other good thing to do. Anytime you iterate, once you're sure that Mac OS works, blow away your time machine disk and start over.
Next question.
I'm sorry, I was in the wrong place for a second there. TJ Asher of Minneapolis says, Scopes Part 2, when viewing a color chart, I had values on the waveform over 100. How is that possible? What's the waveform scale? Is it a percentage?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yes, you can have negative and positive out of range measurements. They're called not being broadcast compliant. Strangely enough, if you compare a Canon DSLR to a Pentax DSLR, you'll find the Canon will clip at 0 IRE and 100, but the Pentax will encode from -15 to +125, which is a stop and a half, I think, of extra information you can pull back in grading because it keeps it in the H.264 files. But you want to stay within the 0 to 100 to be broadcast safe, or is it ACES or DCI compliant?
Next question.
Moving on to A. Mitchell's of Washington. Can we please have some of the other audio experts in attendance today join in the panel for the second hour? Seems some showed up just as the mic checks were started. This has also been done in the past, and it would be a shame to miss out on adding to our available expertise.
We'll see where we are with the questions. We can't do that very often. We
what
do
do
it
you
for
think?
the
We have a
educators.
bat signal? Like,
Well,
come on.
No. I look at it when we start the mic checks. I know that sounds rough, but the problem is that we do it with the educators on Saturday. That's the one place that we do it, and it's on Saturday, and we literally change almost the entire panel, and even then it ties up another 10 or 15 minutes. While we're getting all that working. So we want to get that out of the way beforehand. And I know that I sound very rough about that, but people really have to be here at 6:40. They can't get, like, we start at 6:43. So I'd say be here by 6:40. And then there's three there. It's not, they didn't get here just when they, we would love to have more audio experts, but they really have to be here by 6:40. Like people have to, like there's no, I give 3 minutes to straggle. And so it'll tie up the whole system if I start doing, because as soon as I start doing it, it'll be constant and then people will be upset. So that's why we do it. Next question.
Moving on to a Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois question. Second hour idea. Well, it's actually an idea. Second hour ideas, a full scopes tutorial.
We've done those in the past. If you search back, you can probably find a couple of them where we kind of meander through it, but we're going to talk a lot more about it. I'm actually going to try to get Mike on to talk about Scopebox and really talk about the measurements and so on and so forth. I'm also playing with right now I'm playing with an AJA color front color analyzer, which is really nifty. Anyway, so I'm going to probably get some folks on from AJA. We'll talk about that. That's really jumping into the HDR world and really looking at all the bits and pieces, and I don't think you can really do a show without it. Like if when you're doing a live show, you have to be able to see what's going on. So we'll talk more about that. Next question.
Jake Hamilton in North Hollywood says recommendations on where to start learning about post-production workflow for HDR productions.
Yep. Go ahead, Scott.
So what I'll try to do, Alex, is I'll try and get you a bunch of papers that I think are a good starter place. They are fairly technical. I'll try and get them through to you, Alex, through the means I share with you, and you can post them. I'm not familiar with the Makana stuff yet, so I've got it up here. I'll get them to you, and you can post them wherever.
Yep.
How's that?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Thanks,
Scott. Yeah, and the first step we're going to do as in relationship to that is we're going to start doing Resolve training in January. So that's going to be the first thing that we do to get kind of people on the playing field in that area. And then we're going to definitely do a series of talks about HDR. I think it's really important for us to get good at it. And post is actually easier than live. It's it's much more forgiving. So we'll get into that. It's mostly just really understanding your color spaces. What color space are you coming from and going to? What gamma are you coming from and going to? And then understanding what you're looking at. And so we're definitely going to talk a lot more about that. I don't know of other good places to do it. As I wanted to get training for all of you, I've been trying to find videos that we can post out there and haven't seen a lot of good ones, or haven't seen, many good ones. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to take all that log information and bring it back to video, and there's not a lot of talk about how to bring it back to HDR and how to take advantage of those things. And so we're going to hopefully jump into that a little bit more as we go forward. Go ahead, Scott.
So a lot of people we're building the plane in flight, like the guys who are doing it for like NBC and stuff. They're writing papers that are like, they're going to blow your mind. And there's not like one or two guys, like you've got room full of guys doing math that will make your head sweat doing this. And they're talking about 5.4-dimensional LUTs that are doing not just the color, but the luma analysis to try and figure out how far they can push stuff. This stuff is not trivial. It is hard right now. It is getting easier, but you're breaking in at the right point. You're starting at the ground floor with everybody else. So it's going to be hard. It's going to make your brain sweat, but now's the time to get in there.
Well, and the thing is that the real power, I think, with what we're doing is if we can get 50 or 100 or 150 people learning this together inside of this group, we end up with a huge brain trust, where all of us are thinking about it at the same time, trading notes. If we get enough people doing it, I'm happy to dedicate an hour a week to it, if there's enough people to withstand that. And then we're all trading notes and learning much faster because we're able to kind of work on things together and take even complicated things and break them down into something simple.
Absolutely.
Next question.
Moving on to Nathan of Chicago, who says, we have an upcoming event on 1/21/21 where we need 2 more virtual producers. How do we go about finding the right person for a job like that?
This group is pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of virtual producers in this group. Jeffrey?
Yeah, message me on Discord.
So there's a lot of folks here that's what they're doing. So there is a looking for help. I can't remember what it's called in Discord, but you can also post there. This is what we're looking for. And there's quite a few that are doing this.
I need help, Alex.
Yeah, I need help.
Discord.
Yeah, I need help. I was like, what does Kev need help for? He just jumped out there and said, I need help. And are you okay, Kev? And then that's just the Discord link. All right. Next question.
Moving on to Nathan of Chicago again, who's back with one, and this one almost confused me. Slide.io or Slidio, but I think they want it to be Slide.io, announced they're removing their chat feature at the end of December. We want to embed a chat box next to our Vimeo stream on the website. Any recommendations for a chat box that might also allow for multiple choice quizzes and or polls?
Slidio's getting rid of their chat. That seems disastrous.
Well, they're gone now.
I was just like, now I really have to finish Mukana and get it out there, because the separation of chat and questions is kind of the key to the whole operation. Like that's what makes the whole machine run. So the idea that you would take it, the only thing that we've viewed as close to what Mukana's doing is Slidio. So I got to get going. So the only thing I know of that really does all those things, including polls, is Mukana. I don't know about other ones that you can embed. You couldn't embed it next to it. You'd have to put it around your video, the way our desktop version works. But that can be customized. We're really close. I mean, that's all we're working on now, is trying to get the front end working so that people can set them up. But I don't know when it's going to be ready. Anyway, go ahead, Bill.
Without disclosing anything, I will say, since I've been operating this for a while, there's a lot of work going on, and it is making things easier and faster and more convenient. And I know everybody's anxious to get into this type of product, but it takes a lot of work. And boy, they have been doing this work. And it's easier for me today by a factor of maybe 10 than it was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Next question.
Moving on, except when I have my mouse in exactly the wrong place. Okay. Tyler from San Diego says, Alex, you mentioned yesterday that you use frame interpolation to go from 120 frames per second to 24 frames per second. How are you adding the correct motion blur, shutter angle, to the footage? What software are you using to accomplish this?
I haven't had to do it for a little while. Now there's a variety of different blur tools. Does anyone have any favorites that they use for that? There's an older one so Boris Effects has a motion blur. After Effects will actually interpolate the frames and give you those. And if they already have motion blur, it'll set them on top. Real Smart Motion Blur is probably what I've used the most. So Real Smart Motion Blur is it's a plugin, and it has been typically a plugin for After Effects. So when I do this is something that I haven't tested as much on Motion and Final Cut. The way that Motion and Final Cut handle frames has made really hard for Real Smart to write a plugin for it. So when I have to do this interpolation currently, I tend to go back to, that's one of the places where I go back to After Effects and do the interpolation for videos. I do think that there's no reason why you couldn't build a dedicated hardware process to do the interpolation. It's just math. It is somewhat, to do it at a high end, there is some predictive tools and optical flow that can take up a lot of CPU power, to look at what it's doing. But if you're simply interpolating frames what happens is that you've got this frame here. Let's say you're going to 24. That means you've got 5 frames between every frame. If you're going up to that, or 4, is it 4 frames? And so, 4 frames in between. You're basically, what it does is it calculates the pixel velocity between those. So it's calculating, I'm here, and then it has that other information. It draws a line through that, and then rebuilds that lower third. Not draws a line, but it builds vectors of that motion, and then it's able to recreate that motion blur. So it has a lot of information. When you're going from a lot of frames, what's really hard is when you go from a few frames to a lot of frames, it has to figure a lot of stuff out. So if I'm going 30 frames a second and I just want to add motion blur, now I have to calculate all the vectors. When I have this frame and this frame, and I've got in between frames, in some cases I'm just blending those frames, but there still may be some stutter between those if you're moving too fast. So you may have to reinterpolate more of that so that you don't see the actual frames in between. Go ahead, Jason.
Pixel Film Studios has a free plugin that'll do this decently. As far as going from few to many, of course, that's much harder. What is the name of the extreme slow-mo? It's a high-end plugin, costs several $100. I've used it before, and it works really well for ultra slow-mo. Does anyone remember? It'll come to me.
I mean, the one that I've used the most, and it is a couple $100, is the Revision Effects real
yes.
Real motion blur for After Effects. That's the one that every time I've needed to do it, and a lot of times we would have 3D folks just render without motion. Motion blur is really expensive in 3D, so they'd render out everything without motion blur and then push it through the interpolation and let it build the motion blur for it. So there's a lot of things you can do there. It's pretty snappy, pretty cool. It can take a long time when you turn the quality knobs all the way up to get it right. So do we have any more questions here? Oh, go ahead, Stuart.
Seeing what's sitting behind me, is there a difference in the amount of rendering needed for motion blur for global shutter versus rolling shutter? Because
well, it depends if you're trying to
rolling
correct
shutter
for it or
often
not.
needs to be corrected, doesn't it? To stop
So
Correction
if
is
you're-
different.
Yeah, if you have to correct rolling shutter, then that's a lot different. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something I haven't had to do in several years.
Yeah. I don't. It's. I don't shoot enough things. Like I don't shoot enough things that require rolling shutter. So that's part of my issue. I haven't had to deal with it. Next question.
Okay, moving on to Peter Rosato of Las Vegas. Alex spoke about Earth at Night on Apple TV Plus. I started watching with my son. Amazing visuals. However, the skeptic in me, thanks to the panel, he's got a winky emoji in there, is questioning how much is VFX and how much is real tech that takes in that much light. Thoughts from the panel. Thanks.
Well, I haven't watched it yet. I haven't had time, but I'm going to watch it this week at some point. I think that both this and Small World has a decent amount of visual effects in it. Like they're not claiming, I don't know if they're claiming to, it's not all caught in camera. That said, the camera technology that we're talking about is really impressive. Jason?
Yeah, the camera technology is absolutely there. I will never forget that NAB demo with, what was it, 4 million ISO, Alex?
Yep.
Oh man, it really is impressive. The part that blows my mind is how they managed to colorize it. And yeah, that might be a little deceptive.
No, you can at 4 million ISO, you're still getting color out of that Canon.
I know, but at that frame rate with that motion, like that's the part that blows my mind.
It's pretty amazing. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I haven't seen the show itself, but I've seen a few versions of the trailer. There seems to be, I don't know if you categorize it as VFX, but there seems to be a good amount of noise reduction, smoothing on the image, and there might be quite a bit of sky replacement because a lot of the shots seem just too perfect, with the motion of the sky and also what's happening on the ground.
Yep. Stuart?
Just adding to what Jason said, yes, there's a fair bit of the color work being done. There are some shots where you can see the infrared bleed when they change from what we would normally see to what we see with those cameras. But the other thing to remember is even the drone shots have got low light stuff, and you can actually buy a low light camera for a drone for about 60, 70 US dollars, but it's analog output. So
well, you can
just
also
be aware, the technology is there to do a lot of this.
You can absolutely do infrared on a drone. I've done it. And it's much higher end than that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, you can throw any camera onto a drone. You just
put that same Canon camera there.
Yeah, you can. We've put Ozos on drones, which are pretty heavy cameras.
Give me an M600 and I'll fly anything.
Yeah, they're
it's not hard.
They're like custom built octocopters, and they're actually more stable because they're bigger, and they just have a lot more going on. Go ahead, Raphael.
Actually, DJI has special versions of of their small drones that are equipped with optical and infrared cameras.
Yeah. DJI has a whole section of what they do that's for agriculture and architecture, engineering. So they've got all kinds of sensors on them. What we buy is just the little consumer versions of what DJI builds. Next question.
And the last one before we get to the first one labeled mixers, and we could use some more mixer questions, folks. Art Bly Jr. of Cupertino writes, I have been using OBS for a number of months. All of a sudden, it won't launch anymore. Where do I start? Tried deleting and reloading the first version I had.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, it depends on if you're talking Windows or you're talking Mac. Mac usually just have to delete the icon and that does it. But there are fragmentations that show up. The best way to do this is, or to figure out if that's the case on a Mac, is just to create another profile that you can end up deleting afterwards, and then try OBS on that and see how that works from there. On the Windows side, there are ways you can do just do a search on how to clean, uninstall OBS, and it'll give you things. You'll have to feel comfortable getting in the registry to do it, but it can be done.
Go ahead, Jason.
No, I'll stick with that. Jeffrey's answer is pretty much perfect.
Cool. All right. Well, we're now shifting gears to audio, and we're going to be talking about mixers. So we've gone through mics. We've talked about preamps, and those can work. Sometimes your preamps are in your mixers, but then you start having to take all these signals and create a series of signals. I wouldn't even say one signal that everyone has. It can be a large group of signals that all have to be generated. And really the question there is how to put that together. So we have a bunch of experts here. Who wants to describe what a mixer is? From an engineer, from a perspective. Go ahead, Jason.
Mixer is a tool to standardize the inputs and customize the outputs of an audio set of signals. If I were to do it in one sentence.
Yeah, go ahead. Anyone else want to elaborate on that from our audio group of how they view it? Go ahead, Brian.
Actually, that was incredibly concise. I cannot tell a lie. That wasn't bad at all. But yeah, it mixes. I know that sounds like a dumb thing to say, but it's kind of true. And in a different way than a vision mixer does, because a vision mixer typically is pretty much switching from one input to another input to another input, and audio mixers, by their very definition, are taking multiple things, combining.
It'd be as if you were crossfading between all the different video signals coming in and
exactly
popping out from the other way.
Yeah, it'd be like in the video world, it would be like, I'm going to take 17 cameras and I'm going to mush them all together to make something useful, which of course would be a little bit difficult. Unless you were just making some sort of, hallucinogenic, weird, strange art. But yeah, and it's also where you manipulate the audio. So if you want to change the tonality, if you want to add some special effect to it to make it sound different, and if I want to combine them in a variety of different ways to achieve different things, so that certain outputs has these 4 inputs on it and other outputs may have a different set of 4 inputs, and it's that's essentially the role of an audio console or an audio mixer.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I would say basically it's 3 things. It's a slight amplifier, it's a blender, and it's a router.
Yeah, and you have because a lot of us, especially with the simpler mixers, we think of we're mixing something, we've got a bunch of inputs, and then we've got a stereo out. But in reality, as you get to larger mixers, and even very small larger mixers, you're going to start ending up with buses, and buses are now going to be entirely separate mixes that are within your mixer. So you're now you can have an entirely different chain going through that. In small analog mixers, those buses kind of get relegated to some pots, just some little dials. But on larger ones, you can have a much more defined system. Go ahead, Greg, and then Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to say, and certainly in our world of reality shows and things like that, in a lot of cases, the mixer's job is actually routing the signals to the various producers and things, just so they can hear. Everything's being ISO recorded, and they're gonna sort it all out in post.
Right.
So then your job just becomes routing, and there is no actual audio mixing involved.
Yeah, it was one of the real powerful things that a lot of people didn't know how to do with like a sound device, a 788, because we ran live shows through the 788. I knew everything about the routing. Like I could route all this stuff in and out and do mix minuses and do all kinds of other stuff coming out of it. And I'd have to take, for a sound recordist that wasn't who usually uses the sound devices, it was a little odd, but all those tools are really useful to what you're talking about. You're on set or you're in a show and you have to pass them on. By the way, the 788 or the Scorpio, the 788, the Scorpio could probably do anything that most of what these mixers can do. In a very compact form, but the 788 was probably not the best live mixer ever. That's why we moved to bigger things. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Tatools is in the chat, so I don't know if you want to let him in or not. But
is he in the? Okay, all right. So here's the deal. If the Tatools is in the chat, then I have to break, and that means I have to break for everybody. So if you're an audio engineer,
he's not in the Zoom though. He's probably
okay, maybe
watching
he's
on
just
YouTube.
Mukana. All right,
moderating.
He's not raising his hand. If you're, well, okay, go ahead.
Anyway, I didn't know we've been mixing definitions here, and I didn't know if we were talking about mixer as in the person who does the mixing or the device. Which
I think mostly the device.
Okay, and
and
in the analog days, it's my definition of mixer was something that sums signals to multiple signals into a common bus or single signal. In the old days, it was a matter of physically combining voltages through analog pots, and these days it's done with digital signal processing, where it's done with an algorithm algorithmically to sum them to come to unity gain, so that you don't end up with over voltage on the output when you're summing, let's say, 2 volts and 2 volts and 2 volts and 2 volts, and you're going to end up with 2 volts. So you have to sum them proportionally. So that's basically the function of a analog mixer.
Go ahead, Jeff, and then Bill.
One of the things that kind of confuses people about mix on is the fact that you are creating more than one mix, those other buses. And so I use the analogy of, Mexican fast food. So you go into Moe's or Salsaritas or Chipotle, and what do you have? You have the same basic ingredients. You've got, beans and rice and tortillas and cheese and lettuce and tomatoes. And so your audience wants a beef taco. So you pull a corn tortilla and you put some meat in there and cheese and lettuce and tomatoes and hot sauce and maybe a little guacamole. But the drummer needs to hear a different mix of things. He wants a bean burrito. And so he gets a different combination of same input ingredients. And you can make multiple combinations of those same input ingredients. You can get, an enchilada, you can get a tostada, whatever you want. And every particular person, and if you're talking about a music situation, each member of the band might get a different mix. If you're talking about, a production situation, your producer might need a different mix than your follow spot operator. So each combination of ingredients needs its own mix bus, and that is those auxiliary buses on a mixer. So an audio mixer is designed to create a mix, and then another mix, and then another mix, and then another mix.
And in an analog mixer, you really think of them as auxiliary buses. I think in a digital mixer, you tend to just think of them as buses, right? I mean, they're just kind of like, they're not really aux buses. They're just all the buses that are going through. And the bus is an audio chain in what Jeff was talking about that can be very distinct, from those. And we hear that, like when I was working on a concert last week, and the singer's like, I'd like to have a little bit more of the piano and a little less of this. And so it's not just I want to route it, but I want that burrito to have a little bit more beans, can I have a little less, salsa? And they get it. They just, when you work with a great engineer and a great, and a band that knows what they're asking for, you end up with, they get exactly what they want to hear that makes their ability to do their job well. Go ahead, Bill.
Jeff, you've changed my life. From now on, I'm going to describe all mixers in terms of Mexican food because it was brilliant. I also wanted to say that one thing that makes mixers look complex to people who are just starting out is that there is a thing called, in almost all the old traditional ones, a channel strip. And it is from top to bottom, one input. It could be a mic input, it could be a line input or whatever. But that channel strip with all its controls is usually replicated across, and the number of channels that a board have, those ones on the left all do exactly the same thing. They function in the same way. If you learn one of them, you've learned all of them. Good. Jason has a picture up. So the left side of the board is usually just replication. Now you're going to go over, and in a real simple board, you're going to set levels on all of those, and it's going to add to the master, which is the only control on the right. In more complex boards, you may get like those four that he's kind of the 4 next to the 2, the 4 are kind of a submix section where you can determine the levels of some semi groupings of the one on the left. And then finally you have a master, which is the output of the whole board. So that convention pretty much goes across all mixers. And if you see a huge one, what you're looking at often, yeah, there are more functions, but it's often just more and more and more of those channel strips, and then more complexity on the right side of the board where you do submixes and send your main signals out.
And, you know, a lot of what changes what these mixers can do is really that interface. You know, like what sets a lot of mixers in the core can do many of the same things. When you get into digital, analog has its own, it really has what you see is what you get typically on that front end. But with the digital mixers, like for instance, again, the Scorpio, which I'm using right now, can do just about the buses, all the controls, it can do almost everything that a full, or maybe more than everything than a lot of digital mixers out there. But its interface, without a board, which that Sound Device does make, but without that board, the interface would be difficult to run a live show because I'm sitting there grabbing onto little knobs, and in the same sense that you have with the difference between, for instance, Brian can talk to it, like when you get into Yamaha mixers, the difference between a QL5 and a CL5, the feature set is very similar, but the difference is really how all those sliders and how all that process is laid out, and that, I don't know if Brian wants to talk about that at all, but how those interact and what makes them different.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I planned poorly. So just for the record, I didn't actually change to this camera shot to show these mixing consoles. My other camera didn't come up this morning, so it's completely by just.
Brian's only got 2 CL5s back there.
But
He's just he's slumming it.
And I can, I probably in a matter of just a minute or two, I could actually get a camera shot. I've got of one if we want to do that. I also, I don't know if this is helpful, but my XR18, I can screen share the software that I'm using right now, and we can kind of see, since we just saw an analog console, we could see.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could see what the digital version of that looks like. Here we go. And are we seeing that now?
Yep, we are.
Excellent. Yeah, so this is actually what I'm actually talking through. And so, where we were looking before at the analog console that had kind of the channel strip of, knobs for every individual thing, here in this scenario, we're seeing all the same things. It's just that everything that we see at the top here is just all for this one channel. And, as I change to different channels, you get different settings, but essentially this is a digital version of basically every mixer you've ever seen. The only huge difference between this, which is pretty much software controlled only, and the big giant beast behind me is the big giant beast behind me has way more sliders and physical knobs and just way more of everything. So where this has 18 inputs and 8 outputs or something, these have 96 inputs and 38 outputs, and so it's just, but this is always the thing that I used to go back to when talking about audio mixers is, for the most part, there's only 5 or 6 different things that they do, and the differences between the tiny one and the huge one is just how many times you repeat that. Like, do you have 4 inputs or do you have 400 inputs? Other than that, they're essentially the same thing. It's just building out from that.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, as Brian said, what do? They bring in inputs. So the first thing you do is you bring in inputs and you condition all those inputs to some standard, typically your mic preamp. Then there's processing, EQ, dynamics, and other things. And then there's your mixing, your routing to buses and changing the levels of those. An analog mixer gives you a one-to-one. There is an actual knob or button for every single function. A digital mixer, whether it's completely in software or it's a software with hardware attached to it, like the CL5 Brian's sitting in front of, those abstract. And so they will give you a smaller set of knobs that work on a particular channel at a time. So most digital and software mixers work on what some people term the idea. So you get one function across most of the channels. Usually that's faders. So you'll get 24 or 36 faders. And then you get all the functions of one channel at a time. So you actually get EQ knobs, but you only get one set of EQ knobs instead of repeating those for all 36, 96 channels, however many you have. And so it simplifies the interface, but you can't see and touch everything at once like you can on an analog mixer.
Right. Go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to make one other note. We talk about this like the physicality of the mixer, the physical mixer is important, and it is. But remember that like a guitar, every guitar in the world has a D string, but 100 different guitar players can make that D string do something very different. And, you get these geniuses like B.B. King who can play one string and tear your heart out with it, where everybody else is just making a D sound. And so how you operate, the talent of the human mixer is always going to be the true difference in how a resulting creative work gets put out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's, we have buses, and does anyone want to talk about like the difference between buses and DCAs, in a digital mixer as we start to kind of, go ahead. Brian's nodding. So
I nodded. So I'm multitasking, but I nodded. So although the thing is, like, I think I'm pretty decent at operating these things. I don't know how good I am at explaining them. Jeff seems to do a much better job than me, but I'll give it a shot. So buses, we used to call them subgroups. We used to call them auxiliaries. We used to, there's like 7 different words for essentially the same thing. It's just a bunch of audio stuff joined together, and it's still audio stuff, and you can process it and you can spit it out something. A VCA/DCA/control group is another word for them, / a couple other. You're welcome, Mickey. I already knew what he was going to say. Is a group of controls, not a group of audio. That's why control group is a great phrase for it. The way that I used to always describe it is if I take 7 channels and I put them all in the same VCA or DCA or control group, it is, and assign a fader to that. Moving this single fader up and down does the exact same thing as if I took all Jeff's analog illustration right now is perfect. It's as if my fingers were moving all 5 of those faders at the same time by remote control. And so if you think of it that way, then you can just think of it in terms of what would happen with my mix if I had 5 fingers on these things and I moved them up and down. That's what's going to happen with a DCA or a VCA. There is no audio being processed directly by that group. It's just simply a controller group. It's for basically controlling a bunch of channels at once.
Right. Absolutely. Mickey, were you going to add something to that?
Brian explained it.
Okay, great. And then you can get into one of the things we're talking about is the fact that that things are hidden. There are mixers that get into where you can actually have both analog and like this is a mixer. This is a small version of what I was kind of had the opportunity to look at. Let me see here. So if you look at this one, this is a Euphonics input. Now the brain of the mixer is right here, is in the center area. Each one of these is a strip of controllers. So if you look at this square, these drop in. This is similar to what the Fairlight has, but you drop these in. But this is still a digital mixer, and you can basically constantly change. So you have a lot of the knobs and controls that you would have in an analog mixer, but you have each one of these is a bay that you can throw things into. You can throw mixes into. You can say, okay, I want all my strings here, but a second later you could, if you wanted to, route your drums there. You could have a lot of other things that are bouncing around. And again, like using those DCAs, I can bring my strings up or down, or I can push them out across all of these to grab onto the violins or so on and so forth. And you can group things together and move them around. So you can kind of get into a situation where you're mixing and matching, a lot of those, pieces. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Greg.
Yeah, just on the same topic of, DCAs/VCAs and buses/auxes and whatever each manufacturer wants to call to term their hardware. Maybe some people confuse them because both of them can control levels at the same time for a bunch of sounds. Yep. But with a DCA or VCA, you're controlling the a group of individual channels at a time. It doesn't matter where they're going, where they're routed to. But you can still control them. If you do it with a bus, you have to mix all of those together and then do your adjustments. So you have to really, it's specific to a certain mix of sounds.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead, Greg, and then Courtney.
Okay, two real quick things. You showed somebody showed a shot of the pen, traversing 5 or 6 faders. You have no idea how common that was, except it was popsicle sticks in the old days. Honest to God. To God.
I didn't have a popsicle stick handy, Greg.
There you go. And the second thing is, one of the beauties about digital mixers is, for instance, Alex, you showed this giant, multi-bay console. Essentially, you could do this almost the same thing with fewer bays, but being able to toggle what that bay does.
Right.
So, for instance, you could have 6 aux sends, and you could toggle that same bay to represent your master mix, your strings, whatever, or any of the aux mixes.
Yeah, and really,
one group of 8 faders can do all this, multi. You just have to keep track of it. Is the problem?
Page through the channels.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of what you want at your fingertips at that moment. That's the thing that really drives it. Now, Brian, that's the CL5 up.
Yeah, so that's a CL5, and I'm kind of just showing, how you can select different bays of things here in the center, and the lighting's poor, but in this area right here, this actually, the labels change to what it is when I change to a different layer, and the colors change so that I can keep track of what all these things are. And in fact, this is like I said, 90 something or other input console and 30 something or other output console. On these 8 faders in the middle, depending on which thing I select, I can access every single one of those, as well as a few other things, including DCAs and other things. So I can duplicate, channels from another section, or I can change this bank while I keep this one the same, and I've got another one over here that's out of sight. And so the beauty of a larger frame console like this is that you have the ability to organize yourself, because ultimately that's what it comes down to when you're talking about, when you start multiplying channels. It's all about organization. Then it's just it's no longer the concept of what am I doing. I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again in different combinations, but how do I organize it in such a way that I don't get lost? And so that also when the violinist suddenly says, oh, I need like a tiny bit more of the guitar in my left ear, that I'm not like doing this and going, I don't know where that is. Like it's a, simple button push to select the channel and do what I need to do.
And one of the biggest challenges with digital mixers is that different engineers do it different ways. Like they have a different way of organizing all of those. And one of the big problems we get into is if an engineer has a very different way of doing it than others, they'll screw up everything. They'll come in and go, oh, this is all wrong. And they'll change everything around. It's doing the same thing and just put everything in a different place. And now you try to find it again. And in a digital area, in a mixer, it can be very hard to figure out what happens without resetting it and just starting over, because it's just, there's so many places for it to go. Courtney, and then Jeff, and then Jason.
Yeah, just getting back to some of the
questions.
Some of the basics is, if people don't know what all these acronyms mean, VCA is a voltage controlled amplifier, and DCA is a digital controlled amplifier. Originally, voltage controlled amplifiers were how some of the first automation did. So you've got an amplifier that's being controlled by a variable control voltage. That voltage isn't really isn't directly interfacing or adjusting the signal level. It's controlling another device, which is adjusting the signal level. So you can send that control voltage to several faders, as you said, and use a single control voltage to control several different pipelines of audio information. And DCA is the same idea, only in the digital realm, where they're using numbers going through, the computer in the console to control the signal levels in the different channels algorithmically.
And then to make it even more complicated, if you're doing it in post and you have Pro Tools or something like that, you can have all that automation being attached to time code. So you know all those faders are going up, are all moving along. You know, and Mickey, I'm sure knows a lot about that. But I'll go to Jeff and then Mickey. Go ahead and throw your 2 cents in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, and also in live you can have automation. Well, some companies call it snapshots locked into timecode as well.
Well, and where we've seen it really successful is you have a band and you're going to give that band a click track, you know, live. So you know where they're going to be when, and as they rehearse, you build their mix. You know, like you build the mix as they're rehearsing, knowing that they're going to come back to that. If a band is willing to do a live click track, you can nail it, you know, and you can get all those things to be just, you're not responding to it. Every rehearsal lets you tie that all in. Go ahead, Mickey, real quickly, and then we'll go to Jeff.
And some musicians hate that idea, but some of them love it because they can really build the show to spec to how they want. But it depends on how artists perceive themselves.
I have to admit, the last couple of weeks I've gotten to see both, and they both have their advantages. You know, we had a band that super technical, give them a click track. They have a couple backing areas, and they just go into it and they hit it right on, and it's precise and it's beautiful.
9-inch nails.
Yeah, and then we had a band that was much more analog, and there was something magical about them just jamming and making a decision on the fly on the stage that they were going to do this for a little longer, you know, and the lead singer would go do something like this, and I just told everybody, yeah, we're gonna do another bar or two, you know, like, you know, it meant something to all of them that they're gonna riff a little bit more. So I think both have their advantages. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Jason, and then Greg. I'm sorry, and then Raphael, and then Greg.
So before I get to what I was going to say, Mickey mentioned 9-inch nails, and I got to see a double bill of 9-inch nails and Soundgarden, which was the two extremes. Soundgarden opened up as a 4-piece band with a simple light show. No airs, no tracks. It was all just regular wedge monitors. And then it switched over to 9-inch nails. It was a complete video production, completely synced to click. I would take Soundgarden because it had soul. If we can go back really quickly to Brian and his shot of the CL5, you can really see the conceptual difference of a digital console, that if you look at the actual channel strip of any one of those, it's really simple. He's got a fader, he's got a select button, he's got a mute, and he's got one knob right there in a channel strip. So that he has really, for every of the 24 channels he's got across the board, he has level, on, off, and one knob. If he wants to work on that particular channel, say it's the guitar track, he selects it, and then he has the center control with the touchscreen and the knobs next to it that actually give him auxiliary sends and preamp gain and dynamics and EQ. Those are all the functions of that one particular channel. So he's always working there in the center, but he's only working on one channel at a time. And that's the conceptual difference between that and an analog console that has one knob per function. If you want to modify the EQ on the guitar, you have to go to the physical guitar channel. Brian brings the guitar channel to the center where he is.
Yep. And then Jason, and then Raphael, and then Greg, and then we're going to go on to the questions.
Yeah, I just had a comment, which is, you know, digital mixers are amazing, and they are kind of like a mixed blessing / curse at the same time, because there are more ways for different audio engineers to organize things differently. And the saving grace is that you can save the settings. So as long as you remember to save your settings, you'll be fine. But it's also very easy it's not nearly as easy with a digital mixer to sit down on someone's console and be like, oh, I see what he's doing here.
Right. Go ahead, Raphael.
Well, what I was going to say is that the main difference between your average analog board and your digital board is that on the analog board, the signal is going to follow more or less the way the board is laid out on the front, on the face, while on the digital console the signal goes straight to the computer and then back out, and the panel that you have in front of you is just controls for the computer to apply things to the signal.
Yep. No, absolutely. Oh, and I think we lost Greg there. I was just about to go to Greg and he disappeared. Anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and jump into questions. Bill, what do we got?
Okay, the first one comes to us from James Babbitt in San Diego. XLR connectors work very well and are somewhat large physically. For connections to a small device, is there a smaller version of the XLR that works exactly the same as the larger XLR?
All right, go ahead, Stuart, then Mickey.
There's actually two answers to this question. The first is Mini XLR, which just looks like a small version of an XLR. The second is one that got Blackmagic into a little bit of distaste from some users, which is where you use a tip ring sleeve connection to do your balanced input. And some people, for some reason, didn't like it on cameras when there's no difference with how it works. It just takes up less space.
All right, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, as Stuart mentioned, TA3, or Stuart calls it Mini XLR, but TA3 connector. It's essentially just a small version of the XLR. It has 3 pins. And then some devices use LEMO, 3-pin LEMO, or like the Alexa Mini uses 5-pin. The Alexa Mini LF uses 6-pin LEMO. And these are also tiny connectors that carry balanced audio as well.
And a lot of these will mix and match. To get back to like the mixer that I'm using, the Scorpio has a series of XLRs for your main inputs, and then TA3s to add more capacity without adding more space. The other thing you end up with is also breakouts. Some kind of stage box. And they often cause Yamaha has a Rio. You can have there's other different types of them, and those will go over Dante or over a proprietary network. So there's like the ultra. What does Behringer call it? The ultra net, or they have their own little
Ultranet. I think you're right.
Ultranet, yeah.
It's actually AES50.
Oh yeah, and so it's AES50, and so it's I don't want to pay for Dante. So anyway, but that's what all these proprietary ones are. Is I don't want to pay for Dante, even though it probably works a little better. But you take these stage boxes and you can throw them out there and over Ethernet bring back all of those. But a lot of times it may just be extending what you have in the same room. You use them that way, but they can be just another way to bring in those inputs. Go ahead, Hasmukh.
I'm not sure if I saw it was a Countryman headset, whether it uses a mini XLR. I'm not certain. But if it is, then do you use a converter to the normal sized XLR to connect to like a mix pre?
Yeah, you can. You some stuff will take that straight in. You just take the mini XLR, but yeah, and then or you can convert it from mini XLR to XLR. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Moving on to Marty Attius, Silver Springs, Maryland. What are some differences between mixing and processing speech and live music?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, you just walked right into my wheelhouse. So I will say just the right off the bat, one of the biggest misconceptions is that music is really, really hard to do and speech is really, really easy to do. The reality is that they're both really, really hard to do right. And learning how to do both is a whole completely different game. Music, typically, not to go on too long, but to oversimplify a little bit, very often many inputs all blended together into one big package. That means that sometimes the finest little detail of each individual input may not be quite as critical, and you can still get a pretty good result. Mixing speech, where maybe I have one person or 3 people or 4 people talking, now I've got 3 or 4 microphones, often only going at one at a time, and all you hear is that microphone, and you don't hear anything. There's no place to hide, and suddenly the noise floor becomes absolutely critical. The sound quality becomes absolutely critical. Exact placement of the microphone becomes absolutely critical. Gain before feedback becomes a huge problem if you're doing sound reinforcement. On and on and on. It's a completely, totally different beast and requires just as much skill, if not in some cases more skill to do than music mixing. That's just my take.
Well, and also are you mixing for a room or for a stream or a record? Because in the room, all kinds of bad things can happen and no one notices. But we always have to work with audio engineers when they're like, well, it sounds good to me in the room. And, and we're like, yeah, it doesn't sound good on the stream because we're just listening to it isolated. We don't have the context of the room. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I just want to comment like on as my experience with my experience mainly as a post sound mixer. I find music extremely hard to mix and speech super easy. I can do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But music is extremely hard.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Just on music, because I actually went from taking photos to running a radio station when I first got into media stuff. I had the experience of talking to somebody who was very good at mixing music and described what I did for bands, which was just be able to listen to one instrument and be able to follow it through the mix, and then listen to a different instrument. So I'm listening to the whole mix, but I'm following one instrument or following one voice. And literally, the guy who was the head of Global TV's audio department at the time said, "Yep, that's all I do." And I thought, wow, it's that simple?
Yeah, Bill?
And for anybody who's ever started out in the beginning of your career and tried to do band recording, right? You've got a combo or something like that up on stage. You're going to learn really quickly that the PA mix, the front of house mix, FOH mix, is a whole different beast than a recording mix. And in point of fact, if you just take the output of the board that is being mixed for a performance in front of a crowd, somebody may have said, I need more thump to motivate the crowd, so they'll jam up mid bass and low bass to try to get them dancing. And suddenly your feed is infected with a real out of balance mix already before you start. So you eventually get to the point where you're saying, oh, there are these things called channel inserts, and maybe I can just take the actual channel strips before pre-fade level, before anything messes with them, and move that off to another recorder so I can mix separately for the record than I did for the show, because they're two different purposes.
Yeah, for most of our major shows, we almost always have two audio engineers, one for the house and one for the stream, and so there's a handful of people that we'll use that we'll let them do both, which is, Brian can do both, but he would prefer to usually have two people working on it, but pushed into a corner, Brian can do both, and so but in general, we try to have two different consoles, two different people. We pass the stems to the other one so that you have an entire, and you get into all kinds of other things, like when you're playing out to the room, you have licensing for music that you don't have licensing in the stream. And what you can do is get a 4-channel output where you've got what goes to the room in 2 channels and what goes to the stream in another channel. When you play that video, all those channels go out, and you just route it so that it all works and times out and everything else. Go ahead, Stuart, then Mickey, then Jason, and then Jeff, and then we'll move on.
Let's just not tell the musicians, but often when recording for, say, a pub gig or a live band in a small venue, you'll have all the instruments going to separate tracks. But trust me, the drums almost never go to front of house. Almost never.
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Jason, and then Jeff.
Exactly. Drums, like maybe the kick will go to front of house, but not much else. With regards to having a separate mix for the house and also for the broadcast, you could go back to Jeff Francis's burrito analogy from earlier. Like they different platforms or different uses for the mix need different mixes. Like and also like we can all compare that to front of house mix versus monitor mix as well. Like different purposes again need different mixes.
Good, Jason, and then Jeff.
Yeah, just a final thought. For those of you that think that tracking 2 mixes is just twice as hard, no, it's not. It's 2 to the X harder, straight away.
Jeff?
Yeah, so in your typical, arena rock show, there's one guy in front of house. He's out in the audience mixing what 20,000 people are hearing, but he's making one mix. He's got the easier job because there's another guy on the side of the stage mixing monitors for the band. So he's mixing, 5, 6, 7 mixes. Each of those mixes is going to one person, the guitar player, the lead singer, the horn section. So he's mixing, 5 or 7 mixes at the same time for 5 or 7 people.
And are those coming out of are they in a different mixer, or are they both just working on different parts of the mixer? Go ahead, Brian.
Depends on the size, but usually a separate mixer.
Yeah. Right. So just to give an extreme example, the last show that I did before things got interesting in March was a show the Gershwin Awards with Garth Brooks, and we had a front of house console. We had 37 in-ear mixes, which required 2 monitor consoles. So that's 72, whatever that is, 74 outputs. So we had two $200,000 audio consoles just mixing monitors. And then we had a truck outside that was tracking and mixing a live broadcast and tracking, and it was somewhere around 220 channels inputs.
Second fiddle demands more cowbell.
Right.
Like,
and
what?
It's one of those things where it's again, though, the interesting thing was at the end of the day, we weren't doing anything much different than, Jeff's analog console that he just showed. It was just order of magnitude bigger, bigger, bigger. And then at a certain point, you need more than one person. So we had 2 monitor console engineers. We had a guy who did nothing but manage wireless, which was my job on this particular thing. And, you just have to sort of kind of expand but that's that thing of it's the same thing, but you just go more and more and more and more and more.
Yep. Go ahead, Mickey, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, and in terms of scaling up, that's like having multiple consoles is also very common for music festivals, wherein while one artist is playing, they're setting up another artist on the front of house board and also on another monitor board in Monitor World.
And next question.
All right, moving on. We're moving on to Dan Huber of Erie, Pennsylvania, who says, do you de-embed audio from an HDMI source so that you can mix it first?
Go ahead, Jason.
It depends so insanely heavily on what you're trying to do. I don't think there is a hard, fast answer.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Depending on what the whole setup is, we usually try to avoid running audio through HDMI connections just because it's a little harder to de-embed audio from them as opposed to SDI, where there's a lot of tools available to de-embed.
Yep. Next question.
Okay, this one is going to take a little bit of time to get through, basically. A. Mitchell from Washington says, asking again says, yet again, as yesterday might be considered a bit incomplete as none of the audio experts here were asked to answer. What are recommendations for budget audio mixers with IP remote control, preferably with an app for that too, that have at least 4 XLR inputs? And he's looking for something sub $1,000 US, then sub 500 and sub 200. And he notes this can also include anything that can have remote audio control, including field mixers and audio interfaces. And notes it was surprising that the sub 1000 USD premix and the Atem TVS weren't mentioned. And also missing was the remote desktop control of USB audio products with 4 XLR inputs.
That's quite a question. Very verbose. What I will say is that for the Atem, we don't use the audio at all. I mean, other than maybe to embed it. I really don't feel like Blackmagic has got their head around audio yet. And so every time we go into it, it's kind of wonky. I have a couple constellations, so it's not like they don't have the tools, but like good example, 32 in or 64 in or whatever, and 2 out. You're like, why would you do that? Anyway, Jason and then Courtney.
I was thinking about this because he asked the same question yesterday. The last mixer that I can think of that really checks all of those boxes is a pretty old one. It's a Mackie Onyx Firewire. That was truly an analog and truly a digital and truly MIDI addressable. Other than that, for like that price range, you got me.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Not really a mixer per se, but the Mix Pre 6 is going to be a little too expensive for that price range to get you the 4 XLR inputs. The Zoom F6 though does have, and the other problem is the Mix Pre does have an iPad app for it, Wingman, but it does not allow you to adjust the signal levels, which is, John, you should be working on that. And however, the app for I think it's iOS only for if you get the Bluetooth adapter for the F6 from Zoom, it has 6 analog inputs. Allows you to record 10 channels, I think, and mix to a common common signal out, and their iOS app does give you signal levels and meters and complete control over start stop, metadata control, all of that stuff over that wirelessly to that particular unit, and it's about $600, $700, I think.
Stuart?
I'm still sticking with my answer from yesterday with the Zoom F8. I should point out that it does have remote control via an app, and it also does have an external add-on, which is a row of faders to make it easy to control all of its channels. And they're absolutely fabulous. They do timecode pass-through, and they also do a line level out that you can feed back to the camera with no problems at all.
And, I'm always going to lean back to, if you can stretch it a little bit, we'll just say the sound devices preamps are really nice. That's all I'm going to say. Mickey?
More than a little bit.
Yeah, Mickey.
Yeah, I still go with the answer previously, which is majority the XR18. Both the MixPre and the F8 don't have IP control. Both of those controls are via Bluetooth.
Mm-hmm. Good. Next question.
Asmuk of Cape Town, and a friend of ours from the panel many days, says, MixPre 6, why is it called 6? It looks more like a 5. It has 4 XLR inputs and 1 aux mic input.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Because the aux input can be stereo.
There you go.
There's 5 and 6.
Next question.
Moving on to another Hasmuk question, this time MixPre as an EQ. Explain terms and relationships, inputs versus outputs versus USB. When then in USB output, what do these settings mean? Relationship amongst track, HP, out, pre-fade, and post-fade.
Ooh, that's a loaded one.
Yeah. Anyone want to?
Well, the simplest one to pull out of that and explain is pre-fade versus post-fade, which is on the old traditional mixers, is the signal coming in before it hits the fader so that the fader adjusts it, or is it going around the fader so the fader has no effect
Bill, I
on
got
it?
you. Hang on.
Oh, okay,
Well,
thank you.
And then, for instance, you may want to have the outputs that are going back to a show be post-fade so that you can control them, but you want to record pre-fade so that you, or send pre-fade out as a mix minus to somebody so that they can hear the whole show and everything else and all the chatter, but that's not what's going out. So that you can mix and match the pre-fades per channel to decide what you're listening to versus what is going out of a given bus. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Jeff.
Yeah, specifically on the MixPre, you have, for the inputs, you have your analog inputs, which are the XLR or the aux input, which could either be mic level or line level. And you also have USB inputs that you can route into the MixPre. These are channels that are coming in from your computer. And on the outputs, you'll have your analog outputs, which on the MixPre 3 and MixPre 6 are mini jack stereo output. And on the MixPre 10, on top of that, you also have TA3 outputs, 2 of them. And another set of outputs that you do have on these machines are USB outputs, which are channels that you can feed back into a computer. MixPre 3 and MixPre 6, I think it's I believe a 4x2 interface. No, the MixPre 3 is a 4x2, I think, and the MixPre 6 is a 4x4, if I remember correctly, and 10 has more channels. I can't recall anymore.
Go ahead, Nick. Jeff?
So clarifying about pre-fader and post-fader sends, pre-fader means independent of the fader level. So it will go out that auxiliary bus only based on the level of the pre-fader send. Whereas post-fader is going to be dependent on the level of the post-fader send and the level of the primary channel. So if the primary channel fader is down, doesn't matter that you have the post-fader send turned up, you will never get sound out of it. It runs through both of those gain controls. And Brian's going to say something to correct me.
Brian?
No, actually, no. Everything he just said was true. I'm going to make a quick little point that I've observed, which is that the sound devices are all optimized for portability, which means they're very small, they have very small screens, they have very few controls, and consequently they pack a ton of stuff into what can sometimes be a very confusing package, because everything is optimized for portability, because that is their use case. So when you're fighting your way through a Mix Pre 6 and it's confusing because there's so many, it's just remember that they're taking what is behind me in an 80-pound package and packaging it into, a teeny tiny little thing that you can strap on and carry around, for 16 hours a day. And so, because I find them sometimes quite daunting, and I've done audio a couple times before, and still, like, as I'm trying to go through, I'm like, where's that? How do I do that? And it's just inherent in the trade-offs that they've done for the design. It's not a negative. It's just can sometimes be a little bit daunting to kind of fight your way through it.
Yeah, with a field mixer, the big thing is that you really have to understand the audio pipeline. Like this is not, there's nothing about it that you kind of figure out. You really have to be able to visualize exactly what it's doing in that process. And definitely with most field mixers and probably sound devices more than any other, there's just so many features in there that you have to understand it. You can read the manual for sound devices like once a month, and you'll be like, oh, it's like an onion, because you've now done a bunch of new things and you've thought, where that is. But a lot of us trade notes on it. And again, I've run whole shows on a field mixer, on a 788, on the Scorpio, on other things like that, where you can run an entire show on it because it can do all those things. It's just that you really have to technically understand, how it's running. And exactly where all the buses are, because there's nothing to see, or there's a little screen, but there's not as much to see. Now there are some breakout panels now there have been, the CL8 or CL9, and then the larger one that has come out for the 8 series, and so you can get some of those analog features back. But a field mixer in general is a challenge. It's just, but it is amazing for those of us who've done this for a long time. What these little mixers do that fit in your pocket are kind of stunning. Just from what we grew up with, Hosmuk and then Mickey, and then we'll go to questions. We're gonna have to go into a pretty fast speed round here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. At the beginning, I had no idea how this thing works.
Mm-hmm.
And when during a show, when something goes wrong, I go into complete panic mode. Now I'm a little bit more relaxed because with Mickey, I've spent a few sessions. So I just asked this question to be provocative, but I can more or less now troubleshoot the where the issues are. Yeah, you're right. You need to understand exactly how this thing works.
And with all of this, whether it's video or audio, it really comes down to reps. This is not something you can take just doing more of it. As you do it, and as you bring those questions here to us and talk about them, and then talk to and have one-on-ones with other people in this group, it's running up. You're not really ready for the answer for a lot of this until you have the question, until you're trying to figure out how to solve that problem. And so one of the reasons that I built this group was so that we can be working on these things and trying to figure them out, and then come back and ask questions. I don't understand this. I don't understand that, because now you're ready. Now you're ready to understand what that is. You weren't ready before. You could read through that and it goes, oh, well, this does this, and you don't. Until you go, I can't do this with the product, and someone says, oh yeah, you can, and this is how you do it. Now you'll never forget it, because it's now applied and has context. Next question.
Moving on to Roscoe Jones from the panel. Any thoughts on non-motorized remote faders as found in the new Behringer Flow 8? What are the live needs for motorized faders? Quick scene changes?
Go ahead, Brian, and then Jeff.
So I have very strong feelings about this because I went through the age of automated consoles that didn't have moving faders, and it was bad, super bad. It was also bad.
How do you feel about that, Brian?
The Flow 8 it hits a price point that is amazing, and so I can almost forgive it. But the bottom line is, intuitively, when you look at something and a fader is in a position, you expect that to be what it's doing. And the second that it's not doing what it looks like it should be doing, you end up causing yourself problems. Again, the price point is amazing, so I'm not really dissing the Flow 8 necessarily, but it definitely creates problems.
But save your money and get one with a motorized fader. That's what you're saying. Like, just hold on to that gold a little longer. Go ahead, Jeff.
Pretty much.
Yes, you will regret the money you spend on non-motorized faders.
Mickey.
Buy once, cry once.
If you
Yeah.
are gonna purchase a mixer that has ability to recall settings and also page through different pages of channels, then you want motorized. If not, it's painful.
Yeah. Next question.
This one hurts my heart. The question is, many production mixers mix at the input trims and keep the faders essentially at unity. How do you all mix? I've seen people do this, and it drives me a little weird too.
Go ahead, Jason.
Who are these people? That's exactly backwards.
Yeah,
Like, wow.
I'm waiting for someone to try to make sense of it. Jeff, and then
I will make sense of it, because if you have a signal that needs to be, that's a fairly high level signal, and you need it to be low in the mix, you don't want to run your faders down at, say, -30 or -40, because the resolution, the accuracy of the faders all are down at lower things. So you might turn the trim of those inputs down and bring the fader up closer to unity, where a smaller, the same movement of the fader makes a smaller dB change. So
But that's
moving the
just a
fader,
gain structure misset, right? In the beginning, shouldn't you have the gain structure set correctly so that that never happens?
No, well, you could have had the gain structure set correctly, and you just don't need as much of that signal in the mix. It needs to be lower in the mix. And so you had it set correctly for a good level into the channel, but you're ending up with it being mixed very low in the signal chain.
Okay, I understand that. That makes sense.
Yeah, what a lot of people don't understand in production mixing for dialogue is actors don't necessarily do it the same level every time. And you'll have an actor, you'll do a rehearsal and you set your gain so that they're talking like this, and then they get excited, and you have to crank the gain down to prevent it from clipping.
If you're not, if you're not using 32-bit
and you have to. I've seen some the older mixers now, they're much better. They have much higher dynamic range than they used to. The problem is the dynamic range of the earlier mixers, which had transformer inputs on them. You had to really almost adjust the pads and then adjust the gain, and you had to occasionally ride that input gain to keep it from distorting, or if they get really whispery. There's some actors that
real quick, everyone, we're going to go really fast because we're running out of time. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Jason.
Yeah, I think I get John's question now because of how Courtney answered gave his answer. Yeah, I understand that like, say for example on a reality show where I don't know exactly what the dynamics of each scene might be like, I will have my faders at a rough level where I think they should be in terms of mixing the different channels together. But for the first, like, say 5 minutes of a scene of a reality show, I would be adjusting the trims instead of the faders until I know my ISOs are at a good, safe, conservative level. Then once those trim knobs are good, I lock them down, push them down on the mixer, and then I move on to working on the faders.
Go ahead, Jeff, and then we'll move on.
Another reason people do this is that they know then that track is going to come back at unity. They know where their faders need to be. So if it's, a horn solo that's only in the tune, they've set that, they know if that fader gets moved, they know where it's going to need to come in. So that's one of the reasons that people use that technique.
Next question.
Moving on to James Babbitt of San Diego here. The small Mackie 402 VLZ4 mixer is affordable. Are there some other small mixers with higher quality preamps and higher maximum gain?
Go ahead, Jason.
No.
Not at that price. Not at that price. I think that's about as good as it's going to get at the price that you're talking. Next question.
Moving on to Marty Adius, Silver Springs, Maryland. Some mixers have a feature called automatic mic mixing or auto mixing. When would you use it, and does it work well?
Brian?
So I could do an hour on auto mixing, but
we should get somebody to come on for an hour.
Yeah, I think I know a guy. Dan would probably be the greatest.
I bet Dan would totally do it.
Yeah, he would.
But so auto mixing essentially is a gain sharing thing, so that when you have multiple channels on at one time, when someone is speaking, when there is actual signal on one channel, it will automatically reduce the level of the other channels, which gives you more clarity because those microphones, while this person is speaking, are not picking up a bunch of extra stuff. The beautiful thing is if the algorithm is written correctly, it is completely invisible. You can't hear it. It just happens in the background. A guy named Dan Dugan hit the algorithm correctly in the late 70s, and it's still as good today as it was back then. The primary use case is spoken word, especially with multiple people speaking. So if you have a panel on stage, a bunch of panelists, those kinds of things, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I use it constantly.
Magical. Go ahead, Jason, really quickly, and we'll move on.
One last thing, it is not a substitute for good judgment. If you don't know how to use it, just like cruise control, you're going to get into trouble.
Yeah. Next question.
Marty is back again from Silver Springs with, when thinking about EQ and other processing, please talk about the differences between correct and creative processing.
Brian?
I think they meant corrective versus creative. And I mean, it's really pretty simple. A corrective EQ is to fix something that's broken. That is to say, I've got the microphone in the best possible place I could possibly get it because of physical limitations, and it still doesn't sound like the source. So I'm going to try to fix that with corrective EQ. Creative EQ is, I want the source to sound different than it does. I want it to sound fuller or bassier or more, or it's got a spike on it and I don't like it and I want it to, so I want to creatively, and those are creative decisions, as opposed to just, I'm trying to get the source to sound as close to what it actually sounds like as possible.
Go ahead, Mickey. Did you have it's good.
Yeah, I could share something. Yeah, say one thing, an example of creative EQing is, say, for example, if you want to get the kick drum out of the way of the bass guitar. So you want to carve out a nice like little divot in the EQ and the frequency spectrum for the bass guitar to sit right in. That's part of what I would call like creative EQing.
Next question.
Moving on, we're next have Michael Vosspine up from Woodstock, Georgia. Anybody using Fader Port 2 or something similar, which only has one channel strip that you can assign to the channel you want to work on? It seems to work fine for light mixing with a small desktop footprint. Any thoughts?
Jeff Francis.
A physical motorized fader that you can control is way better for mixing than a mouse, but you've given up 90% of these. So having 10 faders or 8 faders would be much better than one.
Mickey?
Yeah. I used to have a fader port, the first version of that. I had it for like 6-7 years, and for doing simple work at home, it does a good job. But yeah, of course, it's just one fader.
Next question. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Ash.
Yeah, no, this is just a real quick. The main thing you need faders for is to crossfade between one thing to another thing, which is something that you in a live show constantly have to do, and you can't do it with a mouse. It's impossible to fade something up and fade something down with a mouse at the same time, and you can't do it with one fader either. If it had 2 faders, then you could actually, and it was freely assignable, you could do a crossfade, and I would probably use that.
I mean, the only time I've ever used something where I only had one fader is like doing an automation on a podcast, where I just want to pull things in and out.
Tracking
and I just have,
on replay.
like you just kind of push it. Usually though, I still have 4 or 5 people talking, so it's not as useful. But if I have one person talking and I just want to pull out things, you can go very, very fast with a fader, and it's kind of nice to have on your desk to do it. I've always had something with more faders, but I know I was trying to think of when have I only used one, and that's the only time I can think of it. Mickey?
Yeah, I've used one fader for, say, like if I'm mixing a show and I have to ride just like the music track, the background music of a show, and ride it up and down on one fader, then that works well. If you're mixing speech, like if it's just one person speaking at a time and you want to ride that dialogue up and down, then one fader, you can get a lot of stuff done. Maybe this is more specific to post sound than other aspects.
Yep. Next question.
And we're moving on. This is TJ Asher. Is there a decent audio mixer for a budding musician at a reasonable civilian price that can grow with a musician? Thinking maybe 4 to 8 channels, and a reasonable civilian price is less than an Alex.
I kind of feel like the XR18 kind of lives in that world, Mickey?
Yep.
Well, if you're talking about like not live. Say if you're recording music, then Logic has a pretty decent mixer in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go, Jeff.
Yeah, I was kind of going to say, is this for live sound? Is this for recording? Is this just to play around with? Some of the basic analog Mackie mixers with a USB interface is a good place to start, and cheaper than the XR18. Get your physical controls.
Next question.
Victor Caio, our saxophone playing friend from the panel most days, asks, can you talk about the differences between pre-fader and post-fader and so forth?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Kind of covered that.
Yeah. When you're picking up a signal pre-fader, that means typically that is after your initial gain stage, and then after also your EQ if you have EQ in the chain, but before your fader. So if you get a signal pre-fader, even if you fade down that channel and that channel is not going to your final stereo mix, you will still get the signal out of it if it's pre-fader. It will be at the level coming out of your gain, your input gain, and also your EQ. Post-fade is as it's called after the fader.
Jason, real quick.
Another way to think about this is that pre-fader can only be affected, the level can only be affected by the gain. No other knob is going to affect it at all.
Next question.
Moving on to Tyler of San Diego. Do you guys experience similar frustration in wishing that you could configure the meter bridge in a mixer or digital audio workstation to RMS or peak? Setting input gain based off of -18 RMS has been something recommended by some sound engineers and has benefited me in the mix pre and not the QL5 or in Logic.
Well, no, I don't have any strong opinion. Go, yeah. Not with Jeff.
They can peak so that you can see when you're going to have digital clipping.
Yep.
That's the primary reason.
Yep. Next question.
Next question comes from Tyler in San Diego. Why is the QL5 the only console that allows you to target the pan law under the pan knob?
Go ahead, Brian.
Because Yamaha is awesome. That's the main reason. I don't know what else to say. It's the
O1V does too.
Arcane thing that Yamaha included that almost nobody. They're not the only one. There are.
Can you explain a pan law and a pan
Pro
knob?
Tools does as well.
Can you explain what a pan law and a pan knob are for folks?
I don't know if I can do it well, honestly. Mickey, go to Mickey.
I can take a simple shot at it because we talked about this a lot in Final Cut when they were encoding the audio circuits of that. Basically, you have a signal that's panned all the way to the left and it's coming out of the thing at a level. You take it and pan it all the way to the left, or all the way to the right, it's coming out at the same level. But when you pan it to the center, there is a boost as those signals are summed together. And the pan law tells you that if you center things versus panning them one side to the other, your levels get wonky because that center pound signal is different than the other one. So the pan law is to try to ameliorate that issue.
Go ahead, Jeff, and then Mickey.
So when you pan a signal and it plays out the left speaker, it plays at one level. When you pan at center, it's going to play out both your left and right speaker or both your left and right headphones. So naturally, each of those speakers need to play slightly quieter or else it's going to appear like it's louder. So the general agreed upon number is 3 dB of reduction. That's the equal loudness pan contour. And some consoles and software allow you to have a different number for the middle. My question for Brian is, do you ever use something besides -3?
No, I don't.
Our encoders use -6. We have to overcome that.
Why?
Why?
We just know that that's what we have to be careful when if we don't do the mixing ourselves, we'll lose 6 dB.
But is your encoder panning?
It's managing a stereo mix, so it's not panning. It's just if I get it in stereo, it's kind of a couple of different coders we tend to pay that. We have to just adjust for it. So it's an interesting thing. Go ahead, Mickey.
No, Jeff pretty much covered it. What 3dB is essentially twice as loud. So if you're coming out of two speakers at the same time, you want to drop it 3dB.
Next question.
And thank you, Jeff. Much better explanation. The next one is coming from Jeff Westman in Oakland. And what kind of scope is showing behind Brian?
So that is the Ulean, Y-O-U-L-E-A-N loudness meter. That is a LUFS meter with a real-time graph, and it is actually on a computer that's showing everything that you're hearing. So it is a different visual representation of the same thing that you see on the WLM meter. It's just that it has a time-based timeline that you can slow down and speed up so that you can see as things go up and down. And of course, you can set different LUFS levels and whatever. But it's kind of my current LUFS metering of choice.
And last question.
Moving on to the final one, Victor Cayo from Brookings, South Dakota says, explain how digital snakes are used with digital consoles.
Jason and then Jeff.
Okay, the smartass in me says the same way analog snakes are. They're just a box of cables that go up on the stage or wherever you need them to go, and they're kind of like a little mini mixer depending upon the model, but at the end of the day, exactly the same as every other, set of long runs of cables.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So analog snakes take copper wire from the stage, one individual wire, or actually three individual wires, balance signal for each signal. And that puts the microphone preamp at the console 300 feet from the stage. A digital snake puts the microphone preamp and the analog to digital converter in a box on stage. And so it puts it much closer to the actual signal source. So we keep our mic lines very much shorter, which is good because they're very sensitive, low-level signals. We bring them up to line level, we convert them to digital. All of that digital audio is now multiplexed together down one typically either Cat5, Cat6 cable or fiber optic or something like that. The second one for redundancy, and that runs back to the console. And that's Dante or Maddie or all those other ones, AES 50.
Right. Yeah. And those are super useful. Like it really saves a lot of trouble, and for a lot of boards that may have a lot more outputs. And the thing that's kind of cool about Dante, by the way, is that to mix and match them. You can we've used Brian has used X32s, for instance, as stage boxes, because you have all that there. You just drop it. It's actually cheaper than a lot of other ones with a lot more I/O, and so you just drop that thing into a and use it over Dante. To get all the signals back to us. And so you can do a lot of anything that can see Dante can get a hold of it. So you could theoretically have a Rio box, for instance, talking to a Scorpio, or a lot of different bits and pieces there. Jason and then Jeff.
I just had one final thought, and it took me a second to remember the terminology. It's possible that your encoders are doing an encode in joint stereo. Remember joint stereo, that MP3 weird oddity, the way that it was encoded? That might explain it.
Yep, absolutely. Jeff?
When you're taking analog from the stage, and we talked earlier about splitting to multiple consoles, now you have to worry about signal loss and impedances as you're trying to actually have one analog microphone feed a couple of analog microphone preamps. When you've converted to digital, now you can split that signal and clone it indefinitely. So you can feed as many broadcast, a streaming console, a monitor console, a mixing console, all with no loss. It's a clone of the digital signal. You're copying bits.
Yep. Courtney?
And another good thing that a digital snake will give you is most of them, a lot of the good ones have failover. So you have a second Ethernet cable that if the first one fails or gets unplugged or disconnected, it'll automatically fail over to the second one, and you won't hear an interruption in your sound. And of course, also since you're sending signals digitally over an Ethernet cable as packetized data, it's immune to hum and all kinds of EMI that happens on a stage with dimmers and lights and things like that.
Yep. Raphael and then Mickey.
The one thing that is important to do is that you have to route physically the wires in two different locations around the area where you're having your thing. Otherwise, you may end up having both cables cut at the same time.
Yeah, it's not the cable going bad. It's typically a forklift going over it. You know, like that's the kind of stuff that kills. Like redundant runs should go. We try to have them literally come out and then just turn two different directions and go all the way around to make sure that there's only the only place that they're in the same place at the same time is right where they went in, because it's you want to just have a completely different environment that they're going through. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I apologize for the rain in the background, and it's interesting that Raphael also brought out the physical aspect of it, rolling out 3, 4, 32 channel snakes, quite tiring after a long day. So laying down Cat 6 with Ethercon connector is so much easier.
It's a little thinner, and then you add it to. Oh, I'm just going to run a TAC12 up to the stage, and in that TAC12 fiber, I'm going to have my audio, but I'm also going to have all my cameras and everything else. It's like one little cable or two to do redundant, but you've got that carries all that information in and out. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, and the fuel savings of not trucking all that copper wire around actually pays for converting to digital snakes.
Well, and for us, I mean, that is a big piece of it. Is just we pay attention to the thickness of our SDI cables, because it just pays, just loading it in is just easier on your back, And the one thing I will say though is that I highly recommend that you always have a backup, because if it goes bad, there's no backup to it. Like if you run a stage, digital snake up there, having another one super useful, because if rain gets on it, it gets whacked. It's not even that it goes bad. There is no signal. You now are flying, so you definitely want an auxiliary chute, because you are in the air, and the ground will come up real fast if that guy goes bad. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just on what Jeff was saying there about the fuel usage, before digital came into vogue in broadcast, most broadcast trucks that were capable of doing HD actually needed exemptions for the amount of weight, both in the US and here in Australia, for the loading that they were putting on the road through that number of axles. It was startling how heavy they were, even when they were made of aluminium for the frames.
Right. All right.
And actually, Mickey came in with a last minute asking the important questions here. Alex, we need to talk about the new glasses. The look is growing on
glasses. Me. You didn't like it at first? You were like, what did he do?
Yeah, it's kind of questionable. I was like, is he a professor now? What is he?
I need a little goatee
growing
now.
On me.
Moving toward Harry Potter, I think.
Yeah. No, I change my glasses about once every 5 or 6 years. Like I don't buy glasses very often, and so if I buy them, they're usually very different than the last one, because I'm just tired of that, whatever that looked like. And so you like them, okay, Mickey? There at first you were unsure. I do kind of feel like
I have like thick plastic frame glasses now. Maybe I'll study the Alex look for a bit and see.
Well, I could get wires, because I'm going more and more back to contacts, so that's because I won't wear wired ones if they're my only glasses, because if they break, I can't see. Stuart, real quick. Nope, you're muted.
How long before we see the glasses get a microphone mount on the side of them?
Well, that is the nice. There, I think that I could, I think that would be a good one. All right, we had another late question. Let's see if we can answer it in a minute, and then we'll move on.
All right, last what I've locked them now. Liberty White in Atlanta and Toronto asks, are the microphones that work best with the Atem Mini Pro? I've been trying to use the ATR 2100 XLR into a Xenix 502 mixer, but I'm getting a lot of room noise. Then I try to go directly into a Vixia. That's a Panasonic camera, I believe.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, it's probably not room noise. It's probably system noise. And if it is, because changing your technical setup won't get rid of room noise. Only fixing the room will get rid of that, and also getting rid of noise sources would fix that, like that dog in the background here. In terms of trying to get rid, if it is indeed system noise, proper gain staging, lining up your mixer's output to the Atem's input ideally, like by sending out tone and calibrating them to match would fix that.
And the one thing I will say that we didn't really touch on in mixers is the incredible importance of gain staging. Like it is, you know, how you manage your gains from device to device and from bus to bus and from all those things on the way out of getting that all working. We've fixed entire shows by just sending someone over like a Brian or someone else. I just go over to the house, just fix the gain stage, you know, like, and they go over and there's a bunch of things and then the whole thing sounds good, you know, because if there's so many places where people are getting they've pushed it down somewhere and then pulled it back up somewhere else. And what they've done is just brought the whole noise floor into it and, you know, everything else that's there. So gain staging is, we'll spend another hour at some point in the future just talking about gain stages because it is like one of the keys to the operation. Courtney and then Jason, and then we'll move out. And then we're going to go to the post show.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, one thing I learned yesterday is that there is a separate setting. I think Stuart pointed this out for me. On the Atem software control that changes that mic 1 and mic 2 input between mic and line. It should be on the mix panel itself, Blackmagic, but instead it's buried in the little gear down the left-hand corner. If you click on that in settings, you can switch each input between mic or line, and that changes the gain structure of the trim pot then, so they can handle either mic level or line level. You can go in at mic level with a line level if you crank it down to about minus 49 dB, and it still sounds okay. But it's best to use the software control to shift the input level to get your gain staging correct.
Absolutely, Jason.
I think I made that succinct.
Vixia is not exactly known for stellar audio. This is a complete understatement. It is some of the worst audio amongst like consumer cameras. And I'm not trying to insult your gear. I'm just telling you, like, it is just not good. Your best bet is going to do, if you do an embed, like with an Atem box down the line, that should fix you.
All right. That was pretty dense conversation there for an hour about mixers. So I think that gave everyone a pretty good overview of, we'll keep on talking about them. And again, some of the locations that I'm working at, I think I'm going to get to bring you into, and we'll be able to kind of talk to some folks there. But I wanted to make sure a lot of these are, the reason I'm kind of going through these basic ones is for us to have these overall conversations, for you to keep on thinking about them, bring them up in general conversation, general questions, keep on working on those things so that when we have more conversations at a location or we bring a special guest in, that you've got, it just means that we're more ready for those folks. Because we have, especially when it comes to audio, Tuesday is one of the deepest days we go into. We just have such an incredible deep resource of audio experts. It's really fun. So and audio, in my opinion, is the most important part of the event. Like it really is. I mean, it is. Just
Except
remember,
for comms.
No, they're equal. They're equal. They're equal.
Audio.
Remember, comms are 50%, audio is 50%, and the rest is just the show. It's just, but it's just, remember, you can't listen to bad audio for very long. You can watch bad video for a long time, and so that's how you know which one is more important. So we're just going to keep on digging deeper and deeper into these into this stuff. So anyway, we're going to jump to the post show for anyone who wants to keep on chatting about this or whatever else you want to chat about. I have to get to a meeting here in 9 minutes. So I'm going to get over there. Someone's got to get over there to take over. And then